Now, for more on the latest Israeli actions and their implications, let's now speak to Dan Perry, who's the author of the newsletter Ask Questions Later on the online platform Substack. He's also the former Associated Press, head of the Associated Press in Europe, Middle East and Africa. Thank you so much for joining us on Al Jazeera, Dan. Just your thoughts first on the significance of the pause in the U.S. shipments of weapons to Israel. How do you think the Netanyahu government will be viewing this?
They'll be viewing it, I think, as what it is, which is a signal of U.S. dissatisfaction with the tactical part of what's happening in Rafah today. The U.S., I believe, absolutely shares Israel's mid-level strategic goal of removing Hamas from power in Gaza and, of course, of returning the hostages. The way the war has been carried out is another story altogether, and the U.S. has certain things it wants from Israel. For much of the past several months, it wanted Israel to let in much more humanitarian aid, and that is now happening to a large extent. They wanted Israel to make sure that there was a plan to avoid a bloodbath when they go into Rafah, which the U.S. doesn't oppose on principle at all. But they certainly want that to happen after the million or so displaced people have been offered a solution so that they're not in the way of fire. And that, I don't see that Israel has yet done.
Right.
Moreover, I think to the extent that this, partial stoppage of munitions to Israel is a signal, so is Israel's operation in Gaza. This is not in Rafah. This is not yet the big Rafah invasion that had been threatened, and that people who want to remove Hamas from power altogether in Gaza believe is necessary. Rather, it's a signal to Hamas, and that amounts, I believe, to diplomacy by other means aimed at causing pressure to come to bear on Hamas in the negotiations for the hostage deal. Whether or not Hamas is capable of feeling pressure, I do not know, and I have my doubts, frankly, because they don't seem to care about death to the Gazan population.
I'll ask you about the negotiations in a moment, because Israel has sent a delegation to Cairo, but I wanted to get you a bit more of your thoughts on the U.S.-Israel relationship at the moment. Netanyahu clearly is ignoring U.S. policy preferences at the moment, even if as you say, this is just a limited incursion into Rafah for now. The U.S. did not want this. And so far, he's been ignoring these U.S. policy preferences without any consequences. What do you think are going to be the implications of this going forward for the U.S.-Israel relationship?
It's a tricky thing, because the U.S. and Israel are aligned, as I say, on the big picture. But I called it the middle picture. The U.S. and this particular Israeli government are not aligned on the true grand design, which is that Biden would like the Palestinian Authority or some version of it to be restored to Gaza, and Biden would like Netanyahu to cooperate with his plans for a Sunni Israeli Western alliance against Iran and its proxies and allies. Netanyahu can do neither of those things without risking his government falling, because his coalition depends for survival on the extreme right in Israel. This is a very, very delicate dance. Right. And Netanyahu risks causing real alienation on the part of the Biden administration. On the other hand, remember, Biden is somewhat politically limited by the degree to which he can come down hard on Netanyahu, because Israel's become, and the war has become, a wedge issue in a democratic coalition. If he goes too far towards Israel, then he loses the progressives and the Arabs in Michigan. If he does the opposite, he might risk losing the Jews in Pennsylvania.
Let's talk about what's happening within Israel then. So at the moment, you have engagement in negotiations. Israel sent a delegation to Cairo, or even if it's a mid-level delegation, they are there. But there are also movements on the ground in Rafah, as we've seen. Is this more about, as you say, domestic considerations in Israel? Is Netanyahu really interested in a ceasefire? I guess what I'm trying to understand is, where does the momentum and public opinion in Israel lie at the moment when it comes to these ceasefire talks?
So it won't surprise you to hear that on this matter, as in all things, Israeli public opinion is divided, and Israel being a genuine democracy, that creates confusion, but it also creates a vibrant discourse. There are two schools of thought here. One says that the goals of crushing Hamas in Gaza in order to proceed to better times is not contradictory, is complementary to the goal of returning the hostages. Some believe that they in fact contradict, and the only way to return the hostages is to acquiesce to Hamas's demand to end the war. And that would be brutal for Israelis to accept. The notion that there can be an in-between solution where perhaps there is a temporary ceasefire and a partial hostage deal had been attractive to contemplate, but it looks like Hamas isn't really ready for that. And I don't know, but in recent weeks, it kind of started to look as if they'd be willing to go a little bit in that direction, but on terms Israel cannot live with, like 3 hostages a week, and other aspects that Israel just can't agree to. Even moderate liberal Israel can't agree to these things. So I would say, to answer your question specifically, momentum right now is in favor of people who say, you know what, it's been 7 months. There's been a lot of destruction. There's been a lot of degrading of Hamas. And at this point, they should prioritize any kind of deal to return the hostages. I would hope that the Israeli government is intelligent enough at some point to basically say, yeah, let's do a deal. We'll take back all the hostages. But in return, we offer you exile. The Hamas leadership, Sinwar, people who even participate on October 7th, get out of Dodge, and we will return the Palestinian Authority to power in Gaza, or allow that to happen, and work with the world community on the Biden grand design. So far, Netanyahu has not done this.
Right.
His indifference to this deal, which would be really good for Israel, is enraging many people in Israel. And as for public opinion, Netanyahu still has a majority in parliament, and they are, at this point, sufficiently loyal to him that it looks like almost anything could happen and he might survive. It's really on a precipice.
Dan Perry, thank you very much for talking to us. Dan Perry is the author of the newsletter Ask Questions Later. Thank you for your time.
A pleasure.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.